Hello everyone, once again. I am here, and apparently America's Guerrilla Air Force. I don't know anything about the story, even as a historian, but I still like to learn new things.
Will create a guerrilla fighting force, but do you guys remember that time America made a guerrilla air force? No? Grab a seat.
Yeah, I've never heard of this.
Today we're talking about Claire Chennault and the AVG, also known as the American Volunteer Group, aka
volunteers.
the Flying Tigers. Okay, now if you already follow me,
Flying
or if this
Tigers,
is the first
hell
time
of
you've
a
ever
name.
seen one of my videos, you are somebody that just clicked on a World War II Flying Tiger video and probably already know a ton about World War II to begin with, so I'm not going to waste your time rehashing the entire thing.
Okay.
So the super abbreviated version, in case you live under a rock or you clicked on this video.
World War II is such a pivotal event that quite literally it is the reason why most time travel stories go back to that period or focus on that period, because it's a very interesting event. Quite literally, it's the world at war. There's no better way or other way to describe it. The world is at war. Well, I mean, there are plenty of other ways to describe it, but I feel like that's just one of the most accurate ways to describe it. That is a pivotal event in the world's history, in Earth's history.
Video on accident. Prior to the attack on Pearl Harbor, by and large, America did not want to enter World War II. They saw it as a huge European conflict that we should have nothing to do with. Now, despite...
I mean, yeah, most people focus on World War II instead of World War I, but that's mostly video games overall due to the fastest of the guns.
That many people in the government and the military realized that this war was going to come whether we wanted it or not, so they began prepping the military, and
Roosevelt knew that was coming.
Everything they could to help out the Allied forces. Countries like Great Britain, the USSR, France, and in this case, China.
China.
The absolutely incredible story of the Flying Tigers is quite literally the time FDR, the longest sitting president
ever.
That was in reference to the fact that he sat 3 terms, not that he was always... You know what?
Not the fact that he was actually in a wheelchair from polio. He walked around with crutches. People don't realize that he usually was always sitting down, but he never wanted to look weak, which was why he walked around on crutches. He's a man like any other, who worked hard for his country to basically help save the world, is the best way I can put it. It's quite literally the old saying of, they really don't make them like they used to anymore. But yeah, he was astounding president, wasn't he? Well, yeah, it was. They were getting attacked. They were basically, the current Chinese government at the time was just couldn't do anything. It was trying anything to try and stop the Japanese advance. They were in complete disarray. None of it was working, but yeah. Overall, FDR is one of my favorite presidents in U.S. history. He was crazy. Quite literally, when a gun was accidentally almost about to fire on his ship that he was on, he went off to go and look at it. He had someone roll him out on his wheelchair over to go look at it. That man was crazy.
Just gonna move on. We're just going to push through. Anyways, FDR was approached by this crazy ex-infantryman that became a pilot known as Claire Chennault, a.k.a. Old Leatherface. He had recently just come back from China, where he was working as a civilian contractor, and he realized that, hey, Chinese Air Force kind of sucks. It'd be really cool if I could get some American pilots with good training and some American planes and take them over there. I feel like we could wreck house. So he approaches FDR with this idea, and FDR is kind of stuck in this situation of well, I can't send over American service members because then that'll be an act of war against Japan. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to approach 100 of the best pilots and mechanics and ground crew that America has, and I'm going to let them have the opportunity to get released from their contract. They can resign their commission and become civilians again, as long as they agree that they are then going to immediately go over to China with Claire Chennault and found a guerrilla air force and fight the Japanese by themselves. And we are going to get to all of that right after a word from our sponsor. This video is brought to you by World of Warships. Yeah, this is actually all I had to hold up to the camera. It's technically a warship. It's part of the USS Texas, which you can actually play in World of Warships, and not only that, you can have me as the captain.
Part of the USS
they put
Texas?
me inside of the game.
I think that's crazy. I wish I could do that.
If you don't know, World of Warships is a free game on PC, PlayStation,
I
and
wish
Xbox
I could get that popular and have myself in a video game.
Time, like the USS Texas, the USS Iowa, or the USS Enterprise. Or if you're into losing, you could be some
biggie,
of the world's biggest coral reefs, like the
Gragos.
Yamato or the Bismarck. Seriously though, go check it out. I'm gonna have it linked down below. And when you use the code VETS4VETS, you're automatically gonna unlock me and Demo Matt, as well as a Tier 4 battleship.
I don't know who Demo Matt is, but I kind of want to now.
Play. So yeah, let me know how bad me and Matt are at voice acting in the comments down below. Let's get back to the video. Our story begins on September 6th, 1893, when a sweet little baby Leatherface, Claire Chennault, was born. He grew up the son of a cotton farmer and pretty much crushing poverty his entire life. While he was in high school, he ended up seeing an acrobatic air show at the Louisiana State Fair. You gotta remember, this is the early 1900s. Planes are brand new. He'd never even seen a plane before, let alone seen a plane doing acrobatic stunts. And it left such an impression on him that it became his new life goal to become a pilot. Because of this, after graduating high school, he immediately enrolls in college and signs up for the ROTC program at Louisiana State, attempting to become an officer so that he could become a pilot in the United States Army Air Corps. Now you have to realize, not only is this pre-World War II, this is pre-World War I. The United States is not a military superpower yet. The military at this point in time is much smaller, and the officer corps is not something that you just go in there because you want to serve your country. The officer corps is something that you get into because you come from a wealthy, aristocratic family, and one day you want to be a politician, or you want to be a career man that's going to make general. Basically, you have...
It's also because, well, you know, family tradition of having someone be sent into the army, which it was more honorary position at this point. But yeah, this is before World War I, where Woodrow Wilson would actually take in volunteers and do a lot of things. Woodrow Wilson was very against joining World War I, mostly due to the fact of he was a young boy during the Civil War and saw the horrors of war and didn't want America involved in that. Now, Theodore Roosevelt was very angry that he didn't immediately join the war, but from Woodrow's perception, you can kind of see why he didn't want to. War is hell, after all.
To be from the right family and have the right connections, and as a poor farmer's son, he absolutely did not. He was essentially bullied out of the ROTC program his first year there.
Damn.
He ended up finishing his degree at Louisiana State and going on to become a gym teacher. He absolutely hated it, ends up quitting his teaching job, goes and works at a Goodyear tire plant, finds a wife, starts having kids, starts up his family. Shortly after that, World War I breaks out, at which point he's thinking like, okay, the demand for military personnel just went through the roof. Maybe this is my opportunity to finally get a chance to become a pilot. So he goes and signs up for the Army. He's eligible to go into the officer training program because he does have a college degree, and he specifically requests to become a pilot. Now, he does get accepted to be an officer. He goes through the training program, becomes a 90-day wonder where he gets all of his officer training in 90 days. However, in regards to him being a pilot, the letter he received said, and I quote, "Applicant does not possess the necessary qualifications for a successful aviator."
Really?
So while he was able to change his stars a little bit and break into that officer class as a son of a poor farmer, becoming a pilot would prove to be another level of difficulty. You see, the idea at the time was that if you wanted to be a military pilot, you had to be the best of the best. And apparently, in their eyes, the best of the best meant that you basically had to go to an Ivy League college and be an athlete. So, like, you know, if you weren't competitively rowing a canoe at Yale, you obviously couldn't be good at flying an airplane. I truly, for the life of me, will never be able...
I will say, for the first aviators, they obviously didn't know quite well the qualifications that they should be using, so they just use old tactics of, well, soldiers, who is the most fit to do this. But yeah, being an aviator during World War I, god damn. I'm not able to get in either.
Able to understand the logic that goes into this line of thinking. Like, hey, we're going to put you in a potentially life or death situation. Who would you rather have by your side? Somebody that was born with a silver spoon in their mouth that competitively weaved baskets at Harvard?
Yeah.
Or some fucking farm kid that grew up in soul-crushing poverty? Because unless we're having an Easter egg hunt, I'm going with the farm kid 100% of the time, 110% of the time if he's got bad vision, because he's clearly going to be unstoppable. Regardless, Claire ends up getting rejected for the pilot program, and he gets voluntold to be infantry. So now he's an infantry officer, goes through, does all the training. By the time he gets into his unit,
it was obviously a privileged position to be an
on
aviator.
their way to World War I. World War I ends.
So great.
Wow. Granny
So
can,
from here,
that
he gets
Granny
stationed
can
at this
fly.
military base down in Texas, and he's there just like teaching people how to do infantry stuff. But this
All right.
military base
Training
also
officer.
has an airfield. So naturally, he just
All right.
ends up becoming friends with some of the pilot trainers, and he ends up convincing them, like, hey, teach me how to fly one of these fighters. Not only does he learn how to fly, he actually gets so good, they start letting him fly on his own. And the way they're able to do that is the pilots go, they get in their planes, and they drive them or taxi them up to the takeoff line, and then they hop out and let Claire jump in, and then Claire takes off and does solo flights all by himself. Doing this, he kind of like unofficially logs 80 hours of flight time, gets a name for himself locally, and then they're able to end up pushing him into pilot school, so he's finally going to get a chance. So Claire Chennault is now this close to achieving his lifelong dream of becoming a pilot. He just has to pass pilot school, which should be easy because he already has the hours to do so. He just has to go prove the skills that he already has. The problem is he gets there and he's no longer surrounded with all of his pilot buddies. There's nobody there to vouch for him. There's nobody there that likes him, and he is once again
no connections to help
the poor farmer's son. And to make things worse, he's the poor farmer's son that's managing to make all the Ivy League new recruits look like absolute dog shit, and he is bullied and treated very badly
of course,
pilot school pretty much the entire time. And it gets to the point that he's about to flunk out of the entire course because all of his instructors keep failing him. Then, on what is to be his last flight ever, he gets one more chance to prove that he's a good enough pilot, and his coaching pilot, or cadre pilot, is a guy by the name of Ernest Allison. And they go up in the air, and he proceeds to, you know, do his thing. He's a little bit more reckless. He feels more comfortable in the airplane. He's doing stunts that maybe he shouldn't be doing. He's trying to show off to this Ernest Allison guy. They come back on the ground, they land, and everybody's like, well, is this guy going to pass and become a pilot or not? What are we going to do? And Ernest Allison is like, it's not that he's a bad pilot. He's just fucking crazy and does a bunch of shit that pushes the airplane to its limits. We're going to pass him, and then we're going to send him to the Army Air Corps acrobatics team. So now, not only is Claire Chennault a pilot...
I mean, that's a good place to send him to basically a daredevil in a plane. Army acrobatics for Air Corps. That works just fine, honestly. Not the worst idea. But, I will say, yeah, at this time, the military obviously still wasn't that great. I mean, we still have problems with our military not training our veterans well, even after the service they've done for this country. But that's a whole nother topic that could get, well, me angry.
But he's a stunt pilot that's going to tour around the United States showing off how good the Army Aviation Corps really is.
Okay.
And Claire, in his typical fashion, he's got to take it one step further every single time. Not only are the stunts themselves going to be entertaining, the entire event is going to be entertaining. Claire designs his signature move. He goes and dresses up like an old woman and sits in the crowd and stands. And then they're going to pick a random spectator to come out and try to fly a United States Army fighter plane.
That's
so
great.
They pick the oldest woman in the crowd, telling everybody that she's 99 years old. Her face looks like a leather handbag, the whole shtick. And he kind of limps out there in this old lady outfit, climbs into a plane, and goes up in the air and starts doing all these crazy fucking stunts. In addition to being a phenomenal entertainer, he is also a tactician. This man is constantly thinking ahead and trying to establish new battle doctrines, despite the fact that he's just entertaining a crowd of civilians during the day. He goes back home and he's writing papers on how aerial warfare should be conducted in the future. Now, at this point in time, leading up to World War II, the predominant theory was that fighter planes were out. They're gone. They're useless now because we've invented the bomber. It's a bigger, better plane. We're going to cover it with armor and machine guns. And if any fighter plane gets anywhere near us, we're going to be able to shoot them down. So we might as well just not have fighter planes at all. He wrote multiple papers on it. He tried to establish doctrine of how planes would actually go out and attack bombing formations. He was doing all the intellectual work that went into this, and it made all of the other aerial officers absolutely fucking hate him because he's trying to shoot down their idea of just having heavy bombers all the time. Yeah. And because of this, for years, he was repeatedly passed up for promotion.
Of course,
he got so as usual. At one point that they tried to actually...
As usually, the guy who does quite literally all the work gets passed up for promotion because the other people don't like him and just think and don't actually look into it. Tale as old as time, everyone. Anyway, let's go back into this.
Med board him out of the military. Basically, all the other officers were like, this guy's always fucking coughing all the time, and he has chronic bronchitis because he got the Spanish flu back during, like, World War I, and the chronic bronchitis just never went away. So they ended up trying to med board him out of the military, at which point he's like, you know what, fuck it. I'm just going to resign and get out. So he's done. He gets out. He separates from the U.S. military, at which point he is almost immediately hit up by the Chinese government of like, hey, you're an aerial acrobat. You're like one of the top dudes in the United States Army Air Corps. What if, hear me out, we pay you to be an an advisor and come out and teach all of our guys in the Air
Oh.
Force how to fly a plane. Claire says no, he's not really interested. He's got kids at home. He doesn't want to go all the way over to China. He'd rather stay somewhere inside of the United States. At
Makes
which point,
sense.
the Chinese government guy is like, hear me out. I'll give you like $1,000 a month, which is like $25,000 a month by today's
Yeah.
standard, to which he's like,
Dear
I mean,
God.
I don't want to be rude.
Foreign exchange grunt.
So Claire makes his way over to China. He gets there in like either April or May of 1937, and things are way worse than he ever could have imagined. The entire Chinese Air Force only has about 90 functioning airplanes, and they are way outdated. And if
Of
that
course.
wasn't bad enough, the pilots on average are just they're
Not
very
good.
So he immediately gets to work. He starts advising the Chinese government on like, hey, here's the planes and the equipment that we need to start procuring. He's trying to train the officers on all the different things they need to do. And he's also trying to train the pilots on how to become better pilots. This goes on for a little while, and honestly, things are going kind of great. The Chinese pilots are very receptive to everything he has
Nice.
to teach them. The Chinese government's very receptive and trying to get him all the equipment that he needs. He's finally getting the respect that he deserves and wished his own government had treated him with all along. But then, after being there for about 2 months, in July of 1937, the Japanese attack China and begin the Second Sino-Japanese War. And just so we're on the same page, when I say they started the war, I don't mean they
they didn't.
sent a letter declaring war like, hey, we're fighting now, or they attacked a military installation. No, they just started sending bombers into Chinese cities and started carpet bombing civilians. And at this point, the entire Chinese military, including Chiang Kai-shek himself, literally the leader of China, looks to Claire Chennault like, what are we going to do? And while Claire's been making some big improvements to the Chinese Air Force, they're absolutely nowhere near ready to go toe-to-toe with the Japanese. So he has to come up with some kind of plan to slow them down. So on one hand, this is absolutely a horrible situation.
This
to be
I
put
did not
into,
know
but on
about
the
at
other
all.
hand,
Because I just know that the Chinese were completely caught by surprise. They were not ready at all for fighting the Imperial Japanese Army. The fighting did not go well for them, is putting it super mildly. It's, yeah. They were not ready for this kind of conflict. And it definitely shows. They were completely in disarray, especially with the Chinese government at the time.
this is Claire's chance to prove that all of the intellectual work that he'd done over the course of the last decade, all of his battle plans, all of the doctrine that he developed, this was his chance to prove that it could work and that fighter planes deserve their slot on the battlefield. Best way to go about that is to start off with the one strategy that we know for sure works: dive bombing a naval vessel. In August of 1937, under the command of Claire Chennault, the Chinese Air Force successfully dive bombed the Japanese ship, the Ismo. It is the first successful naval dive bomb in world history. This sent a pretty powerful message to the Japanese, like, China's not just gonna lay down and take it, we're gonna fight back. And the Chinese government was so happy with the leadership that they were getting under Claire Chennault that they actually ended up buying him a $50,000 Curtiss Warhawk plane so that he could observe the battle, conduct reconnaissance, definitely not go up on missions and rack up 30 fucking kills because he was a civilian contractor at the time.
Technically
allegedly.
not allowed.
He's absolutely right.
Now, to be perfectly clear,
That is incredibly insane, but still, I'm honestly sad I didn't learn about this stuff in high school or college. But then again, during college we learned about all kinds of things. Usually, though, we don't exactly focus a lot on World War II. We focus on all kinds of things. Usually before World War II, because we never really think about the fact that World War II, in terms of history, is pretty recent. The mark is a mark. AKK send him in. Pretty much. No one's going to say they sent him into combat. We're just going to give him a plane and let him do what he wants. No one's going to say anything. He's just going to do his thing.
clear and intellectually honest, I'm not saying that he did rack up 30 aerial kills. I'm not saying that I can prove that. Not saying anyone ever has. I'm just saying a lot of people seem to think that he did, and he would never really admit one way or the other. But what we do know for sure is that after the successful dive bombing on the Ismo, Claire was like, you know, if it works on boats, I bet it'll work on planes too, and that became the strategy. We're going to dive on the bombers and shoot them down as we fly past them.
Yeah.
Now, the problem is that the Chinese planes weren't fast enough to be able to scramble, get up in the air, get at a higher altitude than the bombers to be able to sneak up on them.
Because that was the main problem, because they thought that planes at the time couldn't get up to the same altitude as a bomber, which, it's obviously a problem here, but Yeah.
So Claire had to come up with another way of knowing when the Japanese were coming. So he had to have the Chinese go and set up observation posts all over China where these popular Japanese bombing routes were, and they were going to radio back and be like, hey, the planes are coming, here's the route they're taking, at which point he would be able to scramble the Chinese Air Force, get them up in the air and at a higher altitude than the bombers so they could sneak up and dive and shoot them as they flew past. Claire referred to this as the bamboo radar, and it worked pretty decently well. It would work a lot better if he had better planes and better pilots, but he's doing the best he can with what he has. And he continues to do that for the next 2 years, 1937, 1938, 1939. Claire is there helping the Chinese Air Force fight the Japanese. But eventually, the Japanese are just too much, and they completely overrun the capability of the Chinese Air Force. All the planes have been shot down, all the best pilots have been killed, and at this point, there's nothing left that Claire can do, at least by himself. Now, at this point, Claire could absolutely cut and run. He's been making $1,000 a month for the past couple of years.
He definitely has the money to
happily ever after, but that's not what he wants. He actually wants to help the innocent people in China that are getting slaughtered by the Japanese military. He knows that he can win this fight. He just needs better pilots with better planes. So, with the help of the Chinese government, he goes back to America, goes to Washington, D.C., and begins lobbying the United States government to send over the American Air Force to help out. And you got to remember, this is January 1941. This is pre the attack on Pearl Harbor, okay? Not going to war sentiment is at a peak in America. So
pretty much at this time, FDR was helping the British and all this, sending them guns, sending them stuff, but we didn't have a legitimate reason at the time to get involved in this war. Like, people make jokes like, well, America really wasn't doing anything until Pearl Harbor. No, we were helping. It's just we had to have something to convince Congress with that we need to get involved because anti-war sentiment was very high until Pearl Harbor, where they could get involved. Anyway.
Request for military involvement from him or the Chinese government is shot down immediately. At which point he pivots and he's like, fuck it, what if I just get a bunch of volunteers like me and I get them over there, we'll figure out how to get planes. So that's what he does. He comes up with the concept for the AVG, the American Volunteer Group. He's going to get a bunch of American volunteers and they are going to go over there and they're going to fight the Japanese. And as I'm sure you can imagine, going into military bases and essentially reverse recruiting people out of the military to go fight a war across the ocean didn't go over that great with many officials or their chain of command. It caused such a stir, in fact, that FDR heard about it, and when he heard about it, he loved the idea because he actually wanted to be involved in World War II. It's his constituents that didn't, so he decided he was going to help Claire out. He basically
I'm doing fine, Killer. How are you? FDR was very much in favor of going to war because, quite literally, well, we have the Axis alliance literally just tearing through the entire world. In America, the biggest fighting power possible is not involved. You can see what's wrong there. Anyway.
Of the best pilots in the United States Army Air Corps released from their contract. They were going to be allowed to resign their commission and go over to China with him. In addition to the 100 pilots, he was also going to get 200 of the best ground crew available. And they're going to get 100 P-40 Warhawks to go with them.
Flying Tigers.
So now Claire and his army of 300 civilians all go. They get passports saying that they are missionaries and teachers and farmers and that they're going over to China to provide aid and relief for some bullshit. They basically smuggle themselves across the ocean and they set up their first headquarters in Burma. Now they go to Burma first because it's technically part of the British Empire, so they're going to be relatively safe, and Claire is going to use this time to be able to train all of his men in all of his new battle tactics and teach them everything he's learned after conducting war against the Japanese for the past several years. And for the pilots, it is a learning experience to say the least, because Claire's battle tactics and doctrine are completely different than anything they've ever been taught. In addition to that, there's a pretty big amount of disbelief when they're told that the Japanese Air Force is actually super legit and should be taken very, very seriously.
The Japanese Zeros were very well made using bamboo and whatnot, but originally the concept of having a plane that was partially made of bamboo at the time was not taken seriously. Until the Japanese bought into it. The Zeros were fast. For some people wondering why I know a lot about this, let's just say I learned a lot about the Pacific Theater at the time, especially the Battle of Midway. My grandfather loved the movie and loved telling me about the Battle of Midway. It's a very, in war, it's a very pivotal battle. In the, in the Pacific Theater, for those that don't know, where we took out basically four carriers, and the Japanese Navy could never recover. Bamboo is a wonder material you could do a lot with. It also surprisingly grows really fast.
Because
people don't really realize that.
Young American pilots have ever been told was what propaganda was telling them. China was some backwood island nation that we shouldn't have to worry about. They can't possibly develop a good plane, and even if they could develop a good plane, there's no way they could mass produce it. And even if they could mass produce it,
we interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
And just to reiterate, before I say this, I'm not saying this. I'm regurgitating the historical, information and propaganda at the time, but that information and propaganda that was being put out basically said even if the Japanese did have good planes, it wouldn't be an issue because
it wouldn't
Japanese
be
people were flying them, and if they flew towards the sun, they'd have to squint, and when they squint, their eyes would be shut, and then
oh my god, I did not know about that.
Okay, obviously, that's fucking dumb, but guess what? If you get told stupid shit your entire life, you're probably going to end up believing some stupid shit, and that's what's going on here. And it gets even worse, because not only are the members of the AVG basically sleeping on the Japanese, they've also been taught just a bunch of horrible battle tactics. Okay, you gotta remember, this is pre-America joining World War II, meaning that a lot of the combat pilots have all been trained by pilots from World War I. Who were the pilots from World War I? They were the boat-rowing Ivy League college kids that were going up in the sky in their plane to have a gentlemanly duel against one another. Okay, the Japanese aren't playing that shit, and they can't if they expect to win, and Claire has to beat that into these kids' heads. So much so that he actually goes ahead and he just outlaws dogfighting altogether. The AVG will not engage in dogfights. As great as the P-40 is, they don't have much of an edge against the Japanese fighter planes, right? They are slower, they are heavier, they are less agile. The only real advantage they have is that they have more guns. Now, I'm paraphrasing here, but basically Claire Chennault walks into the classroom and is like, looky here, kids, the P-40's got more guns. That's really all we've got going for us, so we're going to turn weight into an advantage, okay? We're going to fly up really high, sneak up on them, use our weight to fall really fast, and shoot the enemy on the way down, okay? You ever heard of a drive-by? This is a flyby. And then after you and all your wingmen have finished your dive, you're going to pull up and use that momentum to get really high again, and if there's still Japanese planes in the air, you're going to circle back around and dive on them again. We're going to call it the zoom and recover strategy. We are literally going to shoot them out of the sky utilizing brute force and ignorance on repeat until there's none of them left. This is not going to be some gentlemanly affair like you were taught in flight school. This is going to be hit and run guerrilla warfare in the sky. Now, around this time, some of the pilots just flat out quit. Some of them don't have what it takes, but the vast majority all immediately get on the same page. And that's partially because they trust Claire Chennault, because he's been there, he's done that, and they're going to listen to him.
They listen to the veteran.
It's also because Claire Chennault treats these guys absolutely awesome. In the AVG, there is no rank. You don't have to wear your uniform. You don't have to salute. You can pretty much do whatever you want as long as you're giving Claire the results that he needs. According to legend, one of the more well-known AVG pilots, Tex, actually enjoyed going up in the sky in nothing but his cowboy boots and underwear, and Claire didn't give a shit one way or the other because the man got results.
I wouldn't care either. If he's that good at his job, I would not care. As said in the new Midway movie, I don't care if he consults coffee grounds while doing the boogie woogie, as long as he gives me results. I don't know if that's a thing that Admiral Nimitz actually said, but maybe.
Also around this point in time that they all decided to get a custom paint job of the shark tooth design on all of the P-40s so that they were matching. Now, to be fair, did they come up with that design? No, they stole it from some Australian unit, but they're about to become the most famous and the most well-known for having it, okay? America does it better. I'm sorry, I can't help it. Also, I'm not actually sorry. So the AVG is about to finish all their training, and they are about to start conducting combat operations, and then on December 7th, 1941, the Japanese attack Pearl Harbor. The AVG finds out, Claire Chennault tells his men, you're no longer just fighting for China, now you're fighting for America. On December 8th, the entire AVG moves into Kunming, China. While flying in, one of the pilots has a malfunction with his P-40, ends up crash landing. He gets captured by the Chinese locals, and they almost kill him because up until this point, any crash landing plane was a Japanese person that was attacking them. He is damn near killed, but luckily they were able to recover him in time, and from that point on, it became standard practice for every member of the AVG to have a big peach of parchment stitched on the back of their flight jacket.
Makes sense.
known as a blood chit, and in Chinese it read, "This foreigner has come to China to help in the war effort. Soldiers and civilians, one and all, should rescue and protect him." Once they arrive in Kunming, all the members of the AVG are quite literally embarrassed at the hospitality they received from the Chinese. They are treated better by the Chinese than they have been treated by their own government. At this point in time, these people have basically nothing, and despite that, they are treating every single member of the AVG like they are a king. They have an entire detail making the AVG as much incredible food as they can possibly eat. They're doing their laundry. Every member of the AVG has their own personal bedroom. They built them a baseball field and gun range because even back then, that's just what America's into. And then on December 20th, the Bamboo radar detects 10 Japanese bombers headed straight towards Kunming. Okay, this is it. This is what they've been training for. This is what they volunteered to come out here and do. On top of that, this is revenge
what they were
for
made
Pearl Harbor.
for.
They are going to be some of the first Americans to go toe-to-toe with the Japanese. This is Claire Chennault's chance to prove that modern fighter planes with skilled pilots can absolutely go toe-to-toe and win against modern bombers. He sends up 24 P-40s to intercept the Japanese bombers, and everything goes absolutely textbook perfect. They ambush them from above, shooting down 6 bombers immediately, heavily damaging 3 more, and only allowing 1 to escape. And only 1 American P-40 was slightly damaged in return. This is an enormous victory, and the first victory that the people of China have seen in a very long time. By the time the AVG members land, they are already national heroes. The Japanese, however, are absolutely pissed. They sent in 10 bombers with no fighter escort because they didn't think the Chinese had any capability of defending themselves. The AVG is showing up and interrupting them slaughtering innocent civilians, and they're not going to stand for it. They are immediately going to hit back twice as hard, and this time they're going to come ready. 3 days later, on December 23rd, 1941, the Japanese send 40 bombers and 20 fighter escorts to attack. The AVG goes up, shoots down 12 of them, and loses 2 in return. Infuriated and embarrassed again, the Japanese attack 2 days later on Christmas with over 100 Japanese planes. The AVG was only able to scramble 12 planes in time. Despite that, they managed to shoot down 25 enemy aircraft. Unfortunately, 2 American P-40s were shot down, but both pilots were able to successfully crash land, and both of them survived. In the span of 5 days, the AVG has managed to shoot down approximately 1/3 of the Japanese Air Force in that area. By this point, word of them has spread all throughout China, and they're beginning to call them the Feihu, or the Flying Tigers. From there, word quickly travels back to America, and they are one of the few good pieces of news that the American people are able to point to in the days after Pearl Harbor. Now, when you take all these things into consideration, like the fact that they're national heroes, the fact that Claire Chennault doesn't really have a whole lot of rules as long as you're being combat effective, whenever they're not up in the sky kicking ass, shit gets rowdy down on the ground. They're getting drunk, partying with all the locals. Apparently, they learned how to ride water buffaloes. Allegedly, they had a pet leopard. One night, they got drunk and shot all the chandeliers out of their favorite bar. Just complete chaos. But hey, they're getting results. Claire Chennault doesn't care, and the people of China absolutely fucking love these guys.
Great.
Now, because every time Japan sends over a bunch of planes, the Flying Tigers go up and shoot down a shit ton of them. They kind of slow down the whole bombing innocent civilians for fun thing. Apparently, it's not fun to bully people when you get bullied back. Who'da thunk? Now, despite the fact that the Flying Tigers are outrageously successful and they lose very few planes and very few men in proportion, when you only have 100 planes and 100 men to begin with, it starts to add up pretty quick. By February of 1942, the Flying Tigers only have about 30 operational planes altogether. Some planes were lost completely, some planes were partially damaged and they can't get parts to repair them, as well as just general overall flight use and not being able to maintain them properly. And by this point, Japan has captured every Chinese port, and the only way to get supplies in and out of China is through the Burma Road. It is a 700-mile road through the mountains, and it is probably the most important road in the planet at this point in time, and it is now Claire Chennault's one and only goal to defend it. And because Chennault is a tactical genius, he realizes that the best way to play defense is to play offense. He knows that right now he is incredibly weak, and he has to make his enemies believe the exact opposite. He needs to appear as strong as possible. So in March of 1942, he orders the Flying Tigers to fly into Thailand and attack Japanese airfields, and it is outrageously successful. They do this repeatedly throughout March, destroying a ton of Japanese planes, absolutely infuriating them. So naturally, the Japanese decide they're going to retaliate. They start launching raids on Chinese airfields with all the American P-40s on it, and they destroy a ton of P-40s, or at least That's what they think.
Dummy planes.
Classic blunders.
Claire Chennault had the Chinese make paper-mache P-40 replicas,
Good job.
paint job and all, and the Japanese were flying
Fell
around
for it.
shooting at quite literally paper tigers.
It's amazing the kind of tactics you're able to think of, because, especially at the time, you couldn't know that those were paper-mache, especially from that altitude and from that look.
This isn't even trolling at this point, okay? This is art.
This is something they
Leatherface
used
is
during
literally
D-Day,
10
by the
steps
way.
ahead of the enemy at all
Or before
times, and it's
D-Day.
fucking beautiful. This goes on for a couple more weeks, and then in May of 1942, the Japanese army is caught by the Chinese trying to cross the New River into China with a massive force. Now, this is horrible news, but it's kind of a good thing, because the only way to get across this river is by bridges, and bridges are a choke point where a small number of people are going to be able to hold off a much larger number of people, especially if you had some P-40s flying overhead. And as luck would have it, the Flying Tigers just got resupplied with a couple of new Flying Tigers that are capable of carrying bombs. But the problem is they don't have the logistical support and they can't get any bombs. And we all know the saying, necessity is the mother of invention, right? So the Flying Tigers, I presume, just start showing up to Chinese general stores and are like, hey, I need the biggest vessel that holds liquid that you have, a bunch of gasoline, and some of your fastest nails. Now, we're on YouTube and not Pepperbox. I have to be very careful of what I say. I can't just come out and say they were making... But you're catching my drift. They got creative and manufactured their own equipment.
You said bomb. What's wrong with saying bomb? You didn't say bomb. Bomb, bomb, bomb. Bomb, 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 bomb. Bomb, 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 bomb. You gonna arrest me?
So that alone is absolutely terrifying. But you know what's even scarier is Claire Chennault, the tactical genius, is the one running the show here. And you know what's more effective than just bombing the enemy? If you flew over the river, past the enemy that's pinned up against the river, and just bombed all the supplies trying to get to him. So now the entire Japanese army is just stuck up against this river with no supplies for like a month. The Flying Tigers almost single-handedly halt the Japanese army. Literally hundreds of thousands of men just fucking stuck there and starving.
Dude, what do I do? We'll be stuck here forever.
Cred where credit's due.
Now, by this point, like mid-1942, the American military is really starting to get into gear, and they're actually starting to get forces out into this area. And a lot of the high-ranking military officials do not like the fact that Claire Chennault and the Flying Tigers are by far and away the most effective aerial combat unit in the United States military at this point. They have the most aces. They literally have 25 aces, and they only started off with 99 pilots. They have over a 20-to-1 loss ratio against the enemy, and by far and away the
You're gonna need them to teach
combat pilots in the world at this point in time. So there's this huge push within the military to basically absorb the Flying Tigers back into the military, and against Claire Chennault's requests and the requests of the Flying Tigers themselves, it gets pushed through, and it's gonna happen.
So
on July 4th, 1942, the Flying Tigers are to be no more. But then the bamboo radar goes off one last time, and for the last time ever, 4 Flying Tigers and their P-40s take to the sky, intercept 12 Japanese bombers, shooting down 6 of them without losing a single man. And when they land, the Flying Tigers are officially decommissioned. After 7 months in combat, 23 of the 99 Flying Tigers would die in the line of duty. 4 of them in aerial combat, and the rest to ground fire and training accidents. But they took with them 299 Japanese aircraft. Claire Chennault is to re-enter the United States military at the rank of colonel, and the rest of the Tigers are presented 2 options. They can return back to their previous unit, or they can stay and assist Claire with transitioning the new force over. All of the Flying Tigers are absolutely furious. Claire Chennault doesn't want this to happen. None of the Tigers want this to happen. They had an absolutely incredible team, and they wanted to keep it together as long as possible. Because of that, many of them choose to leave immediately and return back home to their original unit. Luckily, a couple of the Flying Tigers do stay and help Chennault with this transition, and it is a very rough transition because the new man in charge is Joseph Stilwell, aka Vinegar Joe, one of the most controversial and disliked generals in American history. I mean, the audacity for this dude to show up in theater and just be like, wow, you've accomplished all of this with only 300 men. You know what I should do? think that you did everything wrong and not take your fucking advice, which is pretty much exactly what happens. So Joe Stillwell and Claire Chennault basically fucking hate each other the entire time. Despite that, Claire Chennault ends up getting promoted to the rank of general, and he is put in charge of the 14th Air Force, and he remains in China until the Japanese surrender and World War II comes to a close. From there, he goes back home, he retires, he advocates in DC very heavily that the American government should support the current Chinese government because he absolutely hates communists, which, I'm gonna be honest with you, just when I thought I couldn't have a bigger man crush on a guy, he goes and pulls that card, but here we are. And at this point, to pretty much nobody's surprise, it falls on deaf ears entirely. Nobody listens, nobody cares to what Claire Chennault thinks or says, and he just retires and gets to live happily ever after for a little bit, and then ends up passing away from cancer at the age of 67. Damn. And that is the story of the Flying Tigers, America's guerrilla Air Force, one of the most effective fighting units of all time, and their leader, Claire Leatherface Chennault, one of the most underrated and underappreciated tactical geniuses in American history. But I hope this video helps with that at least a little bit. Thank you for watching.
I'm glad to learn about the Flying Tigers.
Some merch over at thefatelectrician.com. Quack bang out.
Oh wait, he's got to do
boy,
one
oh
more
boy,
thing.
I sure do love it when the government comes in at the last minute to ruin a good fucking story.
Anyway, a force of stubborn people. Definitely. So, as I'm going to say, I'm not going to explain why I'm in this model right now, but thank you all so much for coming by. If you like what I'm doing here, please do consider following, and we'll see you all later. Have a wonderful day. Or, not following, but, you know, subscribing and doing all that nice... Anyway, later, guys.